Hey everybody, it's Matt Dabbs from wineskins.org. I have been incredibly blessed to work with a variety of leaders over the years. I've been in ministry for 17 years. I've worked with churches in Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, California. I've worked with a variety of elders, a variety of ministers, and over that time I've witnessed a few things, some things very encouraging and some things very disturbing that I think are really important for us to put on the table. And I offer these thoughts in this video not as a criticism, but more as a description, a hopeful description of some things that are going on so that we can put those things on the table. We can assess them, evaluate them, and really talk about them and empathize with each other. It may well be that you're an elder, and there may be some things that you would hear from me as a minister that may be helpful for you to relate to your ministry staff. And if that's the case, I'm really appreciative to be able to share these things in this video. So let's talk about church governance. First of all, being an elder is a thankless job. It's a volunteer position, and even though in the New Testament it talks about teaching and preaching elders who are worthy of pay, we don't pay our elders. Our elders are completely volunteer. And so next time you see one of your elders, please thank them. Get them a gift card, take them to dinner, pay for a date for them and their spouse. Just thank them, be appreciative of them, because it's a very thankless job. It's a time-consuming job. Many of our elders pay for things out of pocket that are needed. Maybe the budget's a little down, or they just feel like just being generous. They're very often just very generous people. And so there's a lot of things elders do that you just really don't know about and don't need to know about the specifics of, but I'm telling you it happens. They're typically really good-hearted people. And so thank an elder. That's a very important thing. And think about your complaints very carefully before you go take those to elders and what it is that you're really trying to do. So I'm trying to help the elders out here just for a bit. But elders have a difficult job, and elders are typically not trained, and we need to address that. We need an elder link through Cybert Institute at ACU has taken this on and done an excellent job. Some other churches have taken this on at times to help equip elders, and we can talk about some resources later on that. But elders typically are not trained, and they often only know what they've seen in the churches where they've been. They've often been in the same church for a very long time, and so they're very familiar with the leadership culture in that church and are often very determined to maintain the status quo of the leadership culture in that church. So when you pair that up also with the idea that elders often select other elders to add elders or replace elders, then you have the idea of maintaining and perpetuating a culture that is not always a healthy culture, but it's all that they know and they can't see any other way to do it. You also pair that up with the idea that the elders are the ultimate final, well, Jesus is the ultimate final authority. We would see in the New Testament that Jesus is the chief shepherd and he's the ultimate role model and example for our elders. So the elders are not the ultimate authority. Jesus is the ultimate authority, and sometimes elders get kind of mixed up on that and they act like they're the ultimate authority, if we're being completely honest. Jesus is the ultimate authority, but they have the authority in the church. And there is this kind of authority responsibility flip-flop with elders and ministers, where elders maintain a high degree of authority with a lower degree of responsibility. Now, if you're an elder, you may disagree with me on that, but let's consider it from this other perspective. If you're a minister, you have very little authority, but an awful lot of responsibility. And here's why. If you're a minister and things go south, all of your circles, your friendship circles, social circles, church circles, faith circles, job circles, they're all the same circle. So when things go south at the church, the responsibility that a minister bears, the stress, the anxiety, the worry that can be placed on a minister, which is why our ministers often suffer from a lot of mental illness through anxiety and depression, because there's so much stress and burden placed on them because they don't have the authority to implement. They may cast vision and get undercut. They may make a plan and then get shot down, even though they were told yes. There's all kinds of things that can happen that take the air out of the sails of the leadership of the ministers, because they don't have the authority to execute the things that they want to do. That falls on the eldership. And so the elders, if things go south, they don't lose their job, they don't lose their home, their kids don't have to move and lose their friends and their school, all these things that have been settled in. Ministers have a lot of transition. And so you can't really blame younger people from not really wanting to go into ministry, because they just look at this picture and they say, wow, something has to give. There has to be some kind of adjustment at this. It's not always the healthiest the way that these things are set up, although we would say, man, this is quite biblical to place all this authority in the hands of the elders. We're not looking for senior pastors and, one person on top, and that the minister is the pastor. And, we're kind of past all that, maybe not all past all that kind of language, but that's typically not how we think. And I'm not pressing for that, but it really creates some odd dynamics dynamics within our fellowship that I think we do need to at least acknowledge and address. And so here you have a minister who has been trained through years of education, graduate education, to lead, to cast vision, to implement, to execute. They come in with a dream, they come in with a vision, they're so hopeful, and they come into a church and just get squashed sometimes because the elders are not trying to cast vision, and they're not trying to move forward, and they're not trying to go to the next place. They don't know what that looks like. They've not been trained to see it or do it, and they don't understand it. And so all of a sudden you have ministers and elders just kind of at an impasse, kind of crossways with each other. There can be a lot of frustration with that, a lot of aggravation with that, a lot of stress goes along with that, a lot of minister-kid fallout as they see the dynamics of what's playing out with their parents, which puts even more stress on the minister family, the minister parents. And so elder-minister relationships are some of the most stressful things in the life of a lot of ministers. And there's a lot of stories that we could tell about some just things that have gone horribly wrong, and also some things that have gone quite well with elders and ministers. But this is an enormous point of stress and contention in the lives of a lot of ministers. And so elders need to realize that they're not just corporate CEOs, but that they're shepherds, and not just for the congregation, but they're shepherds for the minister and the minister's family. One of the things that's very important to me is for the churches that we've worked at is looking at the shepherds and trying to really see them as my shepherds. And I think that's essentially important, and it's essentially important that elders see that, understand that they're looking out for their ministers, that they're asking how they're doing, taking them out to talk with them, grab some coffee, take them to lunch, whatever. Just check in with them and see how they're doing, especially as the elders find that there's life situations that are going rough in a minister's life. Or, just to check in on that is just so important to be cognizant of that, to shepherd, for the elders to shepherd the ministers. So this idea of a corporate board, CEO, president, CFO mentality comes out of the criteria that we use, the formal and informal criteria that we use to select elders. The formal criteria that we use to select elders is the pastoral epistles, the letters in the New Testament that talk about elder qualifications, husband and but one wife, and we got to go down this list. Are their kids faithful? And we work through these lists. But what we don't really realize is we actually have like an informal criteria, which is typically successful business people in the world. And that is not really healthy for a church culture. There are so many things that are different about the way that elders need to lead and shepherd than a CEO or a president of an organization would need. And so the false idea that we've had in our minds, there's a false equivalence of saying that if you're successful in the world, then you must be a good leader, so therefore you'll be successful in the church. But that doesn't take into account leading volunteers and being in a spiritually minded environment. And so it's really different when it comes to leading in a church. Ministers get this because they get trained in it, but elders never get that training. And so we need to be graceful toward our elders because they're just not aware of how some of these dynamics work out. We need to be patient on that, but we also need our elders to express some interest in being equipped and considering some of these things. And maybe this video will help at least open up some dialogue and some conversation on that. The thing that we have ignored, though, is we've looked to try to have, let me put it this way, if we're going to have a biblical model of eldership, then we actually need to take the Bible into consideration, and not just the pastoral epistles, but some other passages as well. We have really ignored what the book of Acts has to say about elders, for instance. If you look up the word elder or elders in the book of Acts, you see this pairing of the apostles and elders, and they're going about doing ministry. They're going about shepherding people. They're selecting and discerning missionaries. They're with the church. They're fasting and praying and selecting and they finally pick Paul and Barnabas to send them out. And so the elders are involved in the leadership of the church, but they're also involved in the shepherding of the church. And there's this really great passage in Acts chapter 20 where Paul calls for the Ephesian elders, and he tells them that they are to be shepherds of the church, that there's a flock that is under their care, and they are to shepherd that flock. So hey, if you're an elder and you haven't read Lynn Anderson's They Smell Like Sheep, go get that book. Please read that book and implement what you find. This is the ethos, the core identity of elders. We have to move away from the corporate board, CEO, CFO, president model of hierarchy and authority structure from the business world, and get back to elders with people in their lives, in their homes, walking with them, shepherding them, discipling them. Our elders really need to be discipling people. This is a biblical vision for eldership. If we don't want to embrace that, then we shouldn't say we have a biblical eldership, a biblical vision of eldership, because we're not actually taking the whole counsel of the New Testament scriptures into account. And it's not just Acts that we ignore. We also ignore passages like in 1 Peter 5, where it says, to the elders among you I appeal as a fellow elder and as a witness of Christ's suffering, who also share in the glory to be revealed. And he says in verse 2 of 1 Peter 5, be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, watching over them, not because you have to or because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be. He says, not pursuing dishonest gain, but you must be eager to serve. That's in verse 2. And then he says something really important in verse 3 that I can tell you I've seen just ignored over the course of my life from my upbringing and some churches I grew up in, and even in ministry at times, where he says in verse 3, he says to the elders, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. This is where the corporate board business model completely falls apart. You don't lord it over people. You don't use your authority to just go over the top of people. You walk with people. You shepherd people. And Anderson, to his phrase, the elders should smell like the sheep. And then he says, and when the chief shepherd, that is Jesus, appears, you will receive a crown of glory that will never fade. That's in verse 4. And so we've ignored 1 Peter 5. So what we've really been obsessed with are the criteria of how to get an elder in, but we have not really done a good job of examining the scriptures of what an elder does and what their ethos is and what their job description is once they're in. Because if we did, we would have to embrace Acts 20. We'd have to embrace, I think it's Acts 13 with the missionaries. We'd have to embrace a number of passages that talk about what elders are doing and how they lead and what they're like, not just how they get in, but what do they do once they're in. We've also ignored 1 Timothy chapter 5, 17 through 21, that says, the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. Then in verse 19 he says, do not entertain an accusation against an elder without 2 or 3 witnesses, but those elders who are sinning you are to reprove before everyone, so that they may take warning. There's actually a verse there in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 20, that talks about how to deal with sinning elders. Have you ever, I would love to see this in the comments, have you ever seen an elder be reproved for sin in the church? Ever? I've never seen it happen. Would I even want to try to do that? He's instructing Timothy on how to do this. He's instructing Timothy in his ministry of how to reprove a sinning elder based on the testimony of multiple witnesses. But I've never seen that happen. And there's good reasons why that's never happened. Because the people who are in the best position to understand that are the insiders, who are the ministers, who are there to see the dynamics of things and see how things play out and know if it's healthy or not, if it's honest or not, and what's really going on behind the scenes. A lot of people would not have any clue about what's going on. But the person who's in the very best position to address that is in the very worst position to address that, because all the leverage is against them. If they come out and they say the things that are going on, which makes this that whole codependent relationship where the elephant's in the room, but nobody can name it, because if you name it, it's going to explode. And if it explodes, we know who pays the price. It's the ministers, not the elders, right? And so there's a really unhealthy dynamic when it comes to these sorts of things. And we're going to have to address that. We're going to have to address that if our churches are really going to be healthy. And that's going to be really painful. And there's going to be a great unwillingness to do it on the part of the ministers, because everything's running against them. They're going to lose their house, their job, their kids' school, their kids' friends, their personal friends. Every circle is an overlap in ministry. But the elders, on the other hand, don't have that the same level. They do have responsibility, but not quite of the same nature. And so the people in the best position to say it can't, and the people who it would be said about aren't going to bring that up, and they're not going to want to change that, and they're going to fight tooth and nail against that. And so we're really at an impasse with that, unless somehow we can stand up and say, we have to have a better, healthier way forward. We're going to have to put these things on the table and really discuss these things. And so, we really have some unhealthy dynamics when it comes to how elders and ministers relate, and how the leadership then relates to the church. And I think here's what I'm going to say kind of in closing here, is it's really important for elders and ministers to define their relationship and to define their roles and to compromise and come to some conclusions on who's supposed to really do what, and then release each party to go do the jobs that they're supposed to do. And so the minister needs to know what hat he's wearing, and the elders need to know what hat they're wearing. And typically how it's worked out is the minister shepherds people, but is not called a shepherd. And the shepherds do the business of the church and make the decisions of the church, but don't actually shepherd. And so we've really not defined leadership well. We've defined it from a worldly corporate perspective, not from a spiritually minded perspective. And so there's a lot of elderships that are not very spiritually minded, and they go about things in decision-making ways that are not very in tune with seeking what God's will is in the decision-making process. And so it puts elders, once again, elders and ministers on different tracks, on different pages, and yet the one who has all the authority is not on the spiritually minded track, and the one who is on the spiritually minded track doesn't have the authority to really cast vision and implement, and when they do, they often get undercut, and then they don't want to try it again, then they have trust issues. And so if you're an elder and you're watching this, love on your minister. If you're a minister and you're watching this, love on your elder. Ask each other how you can help each other. Sit down, define the roles, define the relationships, and try really hard to start moving the culture of the eldership away from a business, administrative, corporate, lording it over hierarchy model. And let's also, again, be biblical in this, not just in how elders get in, but on what elders do when they're in. They are called shepherds. They are told to shepherd the flock. And if elders are not doing that, then, they're not biblical elders. They're not biblically eldering. I think that's fair to say. That's just black and white in the text. And so God bless you for watching this. I hope something in here has been beneficial to you. And please pass this on to somebody who you think may be helpful to you. If you're a minister, maybe this puts words to some things that you've been experiencing. Maybe your elders could watch this and empathize with this. But there'll be some of you out here who will say, I cannot share this because it will put me in jeopardy. It will put me in some risk. And so there's no way I can share this. And that's really a shame. That's really sad. If that's your situation, that's just so unhealthy. And I'm sorry you're in that position, but it's reality. And so God bless you. I'm praying for our churches. I'm praying for our elders. I'm praying for our ministers because there are better days ahead. But it's going to take some really hard conversations. And the people who have all the leverage, who are the elders, are going to have to be able, hopefully, to even initiate these conversations. If you're watching this and you're an elder, please initiate the conversation. Your ministers will thank you. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you.